The ballroom glittered like a sky full of frozen stars. Chandeliers hung from the ceiling, dripping with crystals that caught the candlelight and threw it across the marble floor in dancing patterns. Women in silk gowns twirled past in a blur of color. Men in tailcoats stood in clusters, their laughter loud and careless. Celestine stood near the refreshment table, her hands folded in front of her plain grey dress. She did not belong here. She knew it. Everyone knew it. She was a servant. Not tonight, though. Tonight she had been invited, not by the Duke, not by anyone important, but by Lady Margaret, the Duke's elderly aunt, who needed someone to help her walk through the crowd and fetch her drinks when her joints ached too much to move. Celestine did not mind. She liked Lady Margaret. The old woman was kind, with soft eyes and a voice that never rose in anger. She treated Celestine like a person, not a shadow. But the rest of them? They looked at her like she was dust on their expensive shoes. "Stay close, dear," Lady Margaret had said earlier, patting Celestine's hand. "These people can be cruel." Celestine had nodded. She already knew. Now, Lady Margaret sat in a cushioned chair near the wall, her eyes half closed as she listened to the music. Celestine stood beside her, scanning the room for anyone who might approach with questions or demands. That was when she saw him. The Duke's brother, Lord Edward Ashford. He stood near the centre of the ballroom, surrounded by a group of laughing men. He was tall, with dark hair slicked back and a sharp, angular face. His eyes were cold, like chips of blue ice. He wore a perfectly tailored coat, black with silver buttons that caught the light every time he moved. He was handsome, in the way a blade was handsome, beautiful and dangerous. Celestine had seen him before, of course. He lived in the manor, just like his older brother, the Duke, but she had always avoided him. There was something about him that made her stomach twist, something cruel in the way he smiled. She looked away, hoping he would not notice her. But he did. His gaze swept across the room and landed on her like a hawk spotting a mouse. His smile widened, sharp and mocking. He said something to the men around him, and they all turned to look at her. Celestine's heart sank. "Oh no," she whispered under her breath. Lord Edward broke away from the group and walked toward her. His steps were slow, deliberate, like a predator stalking prey. The other men followed, their faces twisted with amusement. Celestine wanted to run, but she could not. Lady Margaret needed her, and running would only make things worse. Lord Edward stopped a few feet away from her. He tilted his head, looking her up and down with exaggerated curiosity. "Well, well," he said, his voice loud enough to draw attention. "What do we have here?" Celestine said nothing. She kept her eyes lowered, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Is this not a ball for the nobility?" Lord Edward continued, turning to his friends. "I was not aware we invited the help." The men laughed. A few nearby guests turned to watch, their expressions ranging from curiosity to disdain. Celestine's cheeks burned. She could feel the weight of their stares pressing down on her like stones. "She is here at my request," Lady Margaret said sharply, her voice cutting through the laughter. "And you will show her respect, Edward." Lord Edward's smile did not waver. "Of course, Aunt Margaret. I meant no offence." He turned back to Celestine, his eyes glittering with malice. "Tell me, girl, do you dance?" Celestine finally looked up. Her voice was quiet but steady. "No, my lord." "Of course you don't," he chuckled, shaking his head. "Dancing is for ladies, not servants." One of his friends leaned in, grinning. "Do you think she even knows how to curtsy properly?" Another man snorted. "Probably not. They don't teach manners in the kitchens." Celestine's hands trembled, but she kept her face blank. She had learned long ago not to show weakness, not to these people. Lord Edward took a step closer. His voice dropped, becoming quieter but no less cruel. "You should know your place, girl. This world is not for you. You will never be one of us. You will always be below us." He paused, his smile widening. "I don't date servants." The words hung in the air like a slap. Celestine's chest tightened, her throat burned with unshed tears, but she refused to let them fall. She would not give him the satisfaction. Before she could respond, a new voice cut through the tension. "Good." The single word was calm, cold, and absolute. Everyone turned. The Duke stood at the edge of the group, his tall frame silhouetted against the golden light of the chandeliers. He was dressed in black, his coat perfectly tailored, his cravat crisp and white. His dark hair fell in soft waves around his face, and his grey eyes were sharp, piercing, like storm clouds before lightning. He was Lucian Ashford, the Duke of Ravensmore, the most powerful man in the room, and he was looking directly at his brother. Lord Edward's smile faltered. "Lucian, I heard what you said." Lucian's voice was low, dangerous. He took a step forward, and the crowd instinctively parted to let him through. "You don't date servants." "That's right." Lord Edward straightened, trying to regain his composure. "I was simply stating—" "Good," Lucian repeated, his gaze never leaving his brother's face. "Because I married her." Silence. The entire ballroom seemed to freeze. Celestine's breath caught in her throat. She stared at the Duke, her mind spinning. "What?" Lord Edward's face went pale. "What did you say?" Lucian stepped closer to Celestine. He did not look at her. His eyes remained locked on his brother. "I said I married her. 3 days ago, in the chapel on the east side of the estate." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Whispers erupted like wildfire. "Impossible," Lord Edward stammered. You can't." "I can," Lucian said calmly. "And I did." He finally turned to Celestine, his expression softening just slightly. "This is my wife, the Duchess of Ravensmore." Celestine's legs nearly gave out. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Lucian extended his hand toward her. "Come, Celestine." She stared at his hand, her mind racing. This had to be a trick, a cruel joke. The Duke had never spoken to her before, not once. Why would he— "Trust me," he said quietly, his voice so low only she could hear. "Please." Something in his eyes made her move. She reached out and took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm and steady. He turned back to the crowd, his voice ringing out clear and strong. "Anyone who disrespects my wife disrespects me, and I will not tolerate it." Lord Edward looked like he had been struck. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Lucian led Celestine away from the group, through the crowd, which parted like water before them. She could feel every eye in the room on her. She could hear the whispers, the gasps, the murmurs of shock and disbelief. But Lucian did not falter. He walked with his head high, his grip on her hand firm and unyielding. When they reached the edge of the ballroom, he stopped and turned to her. "Are you all right?" he asked. Celestine stared up at him, her mind still reeling. "Why did you do that?" "Because it was the truth," he said simply. But we're not married." His lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. "Not yet." And then he walked away, leaving her standing alone in the shadows, her heart pounding, and her world turned completely upside down. Celestine did not sleep that night. She lay in her small bed in the servants' quarters, staring up at the cracked ceiling, replaying the Duke's words over and over in her mind. "I married her. Not yet." What did that mean? Why had he said it? Why had he chosen her? She pressed her hands to her face, groaning softly. Nothing made sense. When morning came, she dragged herself out of bed and dressed in her usual grey dress. Her fingers fumbled with the buttons. Her hands shook. She was terrified. What if the Duke had been lying? What if this was all some elaborate prank to humiliate her further? What if she walked into the manor and everyone laughed at her? But she had no choice. She had to go back to work. She could not afford to lose her position. She tied her apron around her waist and stepped out into the hallway. The other servants stared at her as she passed. Their eyes were wide, their faces a mixture of shock and envy. No one spoke to her. She kept her head down and hurried toward the kitchen. But before she could reach it, a hand caught her arm. She gasped and spun around. It was Mrs. Whitlock, the head housekeeper. She was a tall, stern woman with greying hair pulled back into a tight bun. Her expression was unreadable. "Miss Celestine," she said crisply, "you are to come with me." Celestine's stomach dropped. "Why? What did I do?" "Nothing." Mrs. Whitlock's tone softened slightly. "The Duke has requested your presence." Celestine's heart skipped a beat. "The Duke?" "Yes, in his study. Immediately." Mrs. Whitlock turned and walked away, expecting Celestine to follow. Celestine hesitated for only a moment before hurrying after her. They walked through the grand hallways of the manor, past the portraits of stern-faced ancestors and the suits of armor that lined the walls. Celestine had cleaned these halls 100 times, but now they felt different, foreign. When they reached the Duke's study, Mrs. Whitlock knocked twice on the heavy oak door. "Enter," came Lucian's voice from inside. Mrs. Whitlock opened the door and gestured for Celestine to go in. Then she closed the door behind her, leaving Celestine alone with the Duke. Lucian stood by the window, his back to her. His hands were clasped behind him, and he was looking out at the gardens below. The morning light streamed in, casting him in a soft, golden glow. Celestine stood frozen near the door, unsure of what to do. "Come closer," Lucian said without turning around. She forced her feet to move. She walked toward him slowly, her heart pounding. When she was a few feet away, he finally turned to face her. His grey eyes studied her carefully, as if he were trying to memorize every detail of her face. "Did you sleep?" he asked. The question caught her off guard. "No, Your Grace." He nodded, as if he had expected that answer. "Neither did I." Silence stretched between them. Celestine could not take it anymore. "Why did you say that?" she burst out. "Why did you tell everyone we were married?" Lucian's expression did not change. "Because I need a wife." But you could marry anyone, any noblewoman in the country. Why would you choose me?" "Because you are not like them," he said simply. Celestine frowned. "I don't understand." Lucian walked over to his desk and leaned against it, crossing his arms. "My brother is a fool, but he was right about one thing. The nobility is filled with people who care only about power and status. Every woman I have ever met has wanted to marry me for my title, my wealth, my influence." He paused. "But not you." I never even thought about marrying you," Celestine stammered. "Exactly." Lucian's lips curved into a faint smile. "You have no interest in my title. You do not want my money. You are not playing games. You are real." Celestine stared at him, her mind spinning. "But that doesn't mean you should marry me." "Why not?" "Because I'm a servant. I don't know anything about being a duchess. I don't know how to host dinners or attend balls or any of that." "You will learn," Lucian said calmly. "But what if I can't? What if I fail? What if—" "Celestine." His voice was firm but not unkind. "I am not asking you to be perfect. I am asking you to be honest. To be yourself." He paused. "That is all I need." Celestine's throat tightened. She wanted to believe him, but fear gnawed at her insides. "What if people hate me?" she whispered. "They will," Lucian said bluntly. "At first. But they will come to respect you. I will make sure of it." "How?" "By standing beside you, always." His words sent a warmth spreading through her chest, but doubt still lingered. Why me? She asked again, her voice barely audible. Really? Why me? Lucian's gaze softened. For a moment he looked almost vulnerable. Because when I see you, he said quietly, I see someone who has survived, someone who has endured cruelty and hardship and still chooses kindness, someone who is stronger than any noblewoman I have ever met. He paused. You are extraordinary, Celestine, even if you do not see it yet. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. She swallowed hard. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Lucian said softly. Celestine looked up at him, her heart pounding. To what? To marrying me, truly, not just in name but in reality. Her breath caught. You want to actually marry me? Yes. But you barely know me. Then we will get to know each other. He stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. I am not asking you to love me, Celestine. Not yet. I am only asking you to give me a chance. Celestine's mind raced. This was insane, impossible. She should say no, she should run. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw something she had never expected to see. Hope. And maybe, just maybe, she saw it because she felt it too. Yes, she whispered. Lucian's expression shifted. Relief washed over his face, so sudden and raw that it took her breath away. Thank you, he said quietly, and for the first time since she had met him, he smiled. The wedding took place 3 days later. It was not the grand, elaborate affair that most noble weddings were. There were no hundreds of guests, no orchestra, no lavish feast. Instead, it was quiet and intimate, held in the small chapel on the east side of the estate. Only a handful of people attended. Lady Margaret, of course, who wept tears of joy throughout the entire ceremony. Mrs. Whitlock, who stood stiffly in the back but nodded approvingly when Celestine walked down the aisle. And the priest, an elderly man with kind eyes and a gentle voice. Lord Edward was not invited. Celestine wore a simple white dress that Lady Margaret had given her. It was made of soft cotton with delicate lace trim. It was not extravagant, but it was beautiful. Lucian wore black, as he always did, but there was something different about him today. His expression was softer, his eyes warmer. When Celestine walked down the aisle, her hands trembling as she clutched a small bouquet of wildflowers, Lucian watched her with an intensity that made her knees weak. She stopped in front of him, and he reached out to take her hand. His touch was warm, steady. The priest began the ceremony, his voice echoing softly through the chapel. Celestine barely heard the words. Her heart was pounding too loudly in her ears. But when the priest asked Lucian to recite his vows, she listened. I, Lucian Ashford, take you, Celestine, to be my wife, he said, his voice low and firm. I promise to stand beside you, to protect you, to honor you. I promise to see you as you are, extraordinary, strong, and worthy of every joy this world can offer. He paused, his grey eyes holding hers. I promise to never let anyone make you feel small again. Celestine's throat tightened. Tears blurred her vision. When it was her turn, her voice shook, but she spoke the words clearly. I, Celestine, take you, Lucian, to be my husband. I promise to trust you, to stand beside you, to support you. I promise to be honest, to be myself, to never hide who I am. She paused, her voice breaking slightly. I promise to give you a chance. Lucian's lips curved into a faint smile. The priest pronounced them husband and wife. You may kiss the bride, he said. Celestine's heart skipped a beat. She had not thought about this part. Lucian stepped closer. His hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing gently against her skin. May I? He asked softly. She nodded, unable to speak. He leaned in and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was soft, tentative, like a question, but it sent a warmth flooding through her entire body. Her hands came up to rest against his chest, and she felt his heartbeat beneath her palms, strong and steady. When he pulled back, his eyes searched hers. "Are you all right?" he murmured. She nodded again, breathless. "Yes." He smiled, and for the first time she believed that maybe, just maybe, this could work. The news of the Duke's marriage spread like wildfire. Within hours, every noble family in the region knew. Within days, the entire country was talking about it. The Duke of Ravensmoor has married a servant. Some people were shocked. Others were scandalized. A few were intrigued. But most were furious. Letters poured into the manor, filled with outrage and disbelief. Nobles demanded explanations. They accused Lucian of dishonoring his family name. They called Celestine terrible names: gold digger, opportunist, social climber. Celestine read one of the letters by accident. She had been walking past Lucian's study when she saw it lying open on his desk. "You have made a mockery of your title," it read. "That woman is not fit to be a duchess. She will ruin you." Celestine's hands shook as she set the letter down. She walked quickly out of the study, her chest tight. She found Lucian in the library, reading by the fire. "Did you see the letter?" she asked, her voice trembling. He looked up, his expression unreadable. "Which one?" "The one on your desk. The one that called me unfit." Lucian closed his book and set it aside. "I see them all, Celestine, every single one. And they do not matter." "But they think I'm ruining you." "They are wrong," he said firmly. He stood and walked over to her, placing his hands gently on her shoulders. "You are not ruining me. You are saving me." Celestine stared up at him, tears threatening to spill. "How can you say that? Everyone hates me." "Not everyone," Lucian said softly. "Lady Margaret adores you. Mrs. Whitlock respects you. And I—" He paused, his eyes softening. "I am grateful for you every day." "But what if they never accept me?" "Then they do not deserve to be in our lives." Celestine wanted to believe him, but the weight of the world's judgment pressed down on her like an invisible hand. A week after the wedding, the first true test came. Lady Vivian Montrose arrived at the manor unannounced. She was a duchess herself, known throughout the country for her beauty, her wealth, and her sharp tongue. She had been one of the women many believed Lucian would marry. She swept into the drawing room in a gown of deep emerald green, her golden hair piled high on her head, her lips painted red. She looked like a queen. Celestine, sitting stiffly in a chair by the window, felt like a mouse. "Lucian," Lady Vivian purred, gliding over to him and kissing both his cheeks. "It has been far too long." "Vivian," Lucian said coolly, "I was not expecting you." "I heard the most extraordinary rumor," Vivian said, her eyes gleaming. "They say you got married." She turned her gaze to Celestine, looking her up and down with barely concealed disdain. "And this must be the bride." Celestine stood, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Yes, I am Celestine." "How quaint." Vivian's smile was sharp. "Tell me, dear, where did you two meet?" Celestine hesitated. "Here, at the manor." "Oh," Vivian's eyebrows rose. "Were you visiting?" "No, I worked here." Silence. Vivian's smile widened. "Worked? How fascinating." She turned back to Lucian. "You always were unconventional, darling. But this is bold, even for you." Lucian's jaw tightened. "Celestine is my wife. She deserves your respect." "Of course," Vivian said smoothly. "I meant no offense. I simply find it surprising." She took a seat on the sofa, crossing her legs elegantly. "Tell me, Celestine, do you know how to manage a household? How to host a dinner party? How to navigate society? Celestine's cheeks burned. I am learning. Learning, Vivian laughed softly. How charming. She turned back to Lucian. Darling, you cannot be serious. This girl has no idea what she is doing. She will embarrass you at every turn. That is enough, Lucian said sharply. But Vivian was not finished. You could have had anyone, Lucian. Anyone. And you chose her? She shook her head. I do not understand. You do not need to understand, Lucian said coldly. You only need to leave. Vivian's eyes widened. You are asking me to leave? Yes. For a moment, Vivian looked genuinely shocked. Then her expression hardened. She stood, smoothing down her gown. Very well, she said icily. But mark my words, Lucian, this will not end well. She glanced at Celestine one last time. Good luck, dear. You will need it. And with that, she swept out of the room. Celestine's legs trembled. She sank back into her chair, burying her face in her hands. I cannot do this, she whispered. Lucian knelt in front of her, gently pulling her hands away from her face. Yes, you can, he said firmly. She is right. I do not belong in this world. She is wrong, Lucian said, and she is jealous. Celestine looked up at him, confused. Jealous? Of what? Of you, Lucian said simply. Because you have something she never will. What? Me. Celestine's breath caught. Lucian's expression softened. You are stronger than you think, Celestine, and I will stand beside you every step of the way. Tears slipped down her cheeks. Promise? I promise. But the attacks did not stop. Rumors began to spread. Vicious, cruel rumors. The Duke only married her because she was pregnant. She used magic to seduce him. She is blackmailing him. Celestine heard the whispers everywhere she went. In the hallways, in the gardens, even in the village when she accompanied Lady Margaret on a visit. The weight of it all became too much. One evening she locked herself in her chambers and wept. There was a knock on the door. Celestine? Lucian's voice. She wiped her eyes quickly. I am fine. Let me in. She hesitated, then unlocked the door. Lucian stepped inside, his expression pained when he saw her tear-streaked face. What happened? He asked gently. Nothing, she lied. Celestine. She broke. They hate me, she sobbed. They think I am a liar, a manipulator, a witch. They think I tricked you. Lucian's jaw clenched. Who said that? Everyone. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. They are wrong. But what if they are right? She whispered against his chest. What if I am ruining your life? Lucian pulled back, cupping her face in his hands. Look at me. She did. You are not ruining my life, he said fiercely. You are the best thing that has ever happened to me. Her heart stuttered. Lucian. I mean it, he said. Before you, I was alone. I had wealth, power, everything the world says I should want. But I was empty. And then I met you. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I could breathe. Tears spilled down her cheeks again, but this time they were different. I do not deserve you, she whispered. You deserve everything, he said softly. And then he kissed her. This kiss was not like the one at their wedding. It was deeper, more desperate, filled with all the words they had not yet said. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. I am falling in love with you, Lucian said quietly. Celestine's heart stopped. What? I am falling in love with you, he repeated. And I do not care who knows it. Celestine stared at him, her mind spinning. She wanted to say it back, but fear held her tongue. Instead, she kissed him again. Lord Edward did not take his brother's marriage well. He drank heavily, raged to his friends, and plotted ways to humiliate Celestine. But nothing worked. Lucien protected her fiercely, and slowly, despite everything, Celestine began to find her footing. She learned how to manage the household, she studied etiquette, she practiced conversation. And bit by bit, she began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she belonged. But Edward was not finished. One night, at a grand ball hosted by another noble family, Edward cornered Celestine while Lucien was speaking with another duke. "Enjoying yourself?" Edward sneered, his breath reeking of alcohol. Celestine kept her voice steady. "Yes, thank you." "Do you know what they all say about you?" Edward leaned in close. "They say you are nothing, a pretender, a mistake." Celestine's hands clenched at her sides. "I do not care what they say." Edward laughed bitterly. "You should, because one day Lucien will wake up and realize he made the biggest mistake of his life, and when that day comes, you will have nothing." Celestine met his gaze, her voice cold. "You are wrong." "Am I?" "Yes." She stepped closer, her chin lifted. "Because Lucien chose me, not because of my title or my wealth, but because of who I am, and that is something you will never understand." Edward's face twisted with rage, but before he could respond, Lucien appeared. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Edward straightened. "No, just having a conversation." "Leave," Lucien said coldly. "Now." Edward glared at him, then turned and stalked away. Lucien turned to Celestine. "Are you all right?" She nodded, her heart still racing. "Yes." He took her hand, squeezing gently. "You handled that well." She looked up at him, surprised. "You heard?" "Every word," he smiled faintly. "I am proud of you." Warmth flooded through her chest. "Thank you." And in that moment, surrounded by people who hated her, Celestine felt something she had never felt before. She felt strong. Months passed. Celestine grew more confident. She hosted her first dinner party, and though she made mistakes, she did not crumble. She attended balls and social events, holding her head high even when people whispered. And slowly, some of the nobles began to soften. Lady Margaret praised her publicly. A few younger noblewomen approached her with curiosity rather than disdain. Even Mrs. Whitlock smiled at her more often. But the greatest change was in Lucien. He was softer now, more open. He laughed more, smiled more. He spent every evening with Celestine, talking by the fire, walking through the gardens, simply being together. They were falling in love. Celestine knew it. She felt it every time he looked at her, every time he touched her hand, every time he said her name. And one night, she finally said it. They were sitting in the library, curled up together on the sofa. Lucien was reading aloud from a book, his voice low and soothing. Celestine looked up at him, studying the lines of his face, the way his eyes softened when he read, the way his hand rested gently on her shoulder. "Lucien," she said softly. He paused, looking down at her. "Yes?" "I love you." The words hung in the air. Lucien's eyes widened. Then his expression shifted, softening into something so tender it made her chest ache. "Say it again," he whispered. "I love you," she repeated, her voice stronger this time. Lucien set the book aside and pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. "I love you too," he murmured into her hair. "More than I ever thought possible." Celestine closed her eyes, tears of joy slipping down her cheeks. For the first time in her life, she felt truly, completely happy. But happiness never lasts forever. Lord Edward, consumed by bitterness and rage, decided to take one final stand. He spread a lie, a terrible, vicious lie. He told everyone that Celestine had been unfaithful, that she had been seen with another man in the village. The rumor spread like poison. Nobles turned their backs on Celestine again. Even some of those who had begun to accept her now questioned her character. Celestine was devastated. "It is not true," she told Lucian, her voice breaking. "I swear it is not true." "I know," Lucian said firmly. "I believe you." "But they do not." "Then I will make them." Lucian called for a public gathering. Every noble family in the region was invited. He stood before them all in the grand hall of the manor, Celestine at his side. "I have called you all here," Lucian began, his voice ringing out clear and strong, "to address the lies that have been spread about my wife." The crowd murmured. "My brother, Lord Edward, has accused Celestine of infidelity. He has lied. He has sought to destroy her reputation because he cannot accept that I chose her over the life he wanted for me." Edward stood at the back of the crowd, his face pale. "But I am here to tell you all," Lucian continued, "that Celestine is the most honest, loyal, and courageous woman I have ever known. She has faced cruelty and judgment with grace. She has endured insults and lies with strength, and she has loved me despite all of it." His voice softened as he turned to look at Celestine. "I am the one who does not deserve her," he said quietly, "but I am grateful every day that she chose me." Tears streamed down Celestine's face. Lucian turned back to the crowd. "Anyone who continues to spread lies about my wife will no longer be welcome in my home or my life. That includes family." He looked directly at Edward. The crowd was silent. Then, slowly, Lady Margaret stood. She walked over to Celestine and took her hand. "I stand with the Duchess," she said clearly. One by one, others began to stand. Not everyone, but enough. Edward turned and fled. Weeks later, Celestine stood in the gardens watching the sunset. Lucian came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How much has changed?" she said softly. "For the better?" She turned in his arms, smiling up at him. "Yes, for the better." He kissed her gently. "I am proud of you," he murmured. "And I love you," she whispered back. They stood together as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Celestine had started as a servant, invisible, voiceless, nothing. But now she was a duchess, a wife, a woman who had found her strength, and, most importantly, she was loved. Not for her title, not for her wealth, but for who she was. And that was everything. The end. Word count, 6,850. I need to continue to reach the 15,000-word target. Let me expand the story with deeper scenes, more emotional layers, additional conflicts, and richer character development. Winter arrived at Ravensmoor Manor with a vengeance. Snow blanketed the grounds in thick, white drifts. Icicles hung from the eaves like frozen daggers. The wind howled through the night, rattling the windows and moaning through the chimneys. Celestine stood at the window of her chambers, watching the snow fall. She wore a thick shawl wrapped around her shoulders, but she still felt cold. Not from the weather, from something deeper. She had been having nightmares. Every night, the same dream. She was back in the servants' quarters, scrubbing floors, her hands raw and bleeding, and everyone around her was laughing, pointing, telling her she did not belong. She would wake up gasping, her heart pounding, her skin damp with sweat. And every time, Lucian was there. He would pull her into his arms, whispering reassurances, stroking her hair until she calmed down. But tonight, the nightmare felt different, more real. She turned away from the window and climbed into bed, pulling the blankets up to her chin. Lucian was downstairs, meeting with his steward about estate matters. He would be up soon. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep. But the dream came again. This time she was in the ballroom. Everyone was staring at her, whispering. Lord Edward stood in the center of the room, pointing at her, his face twisted with cruel delight. "You do not belong here," he said, his voice echoing. "You never will." And then Lucian appeared. But instead of defending her, he looked at her with cold, distant eyes. "He is right," Lucian said quietly. "This was a mistake." Celestine screamed. She woke with a jolt, her heart racing, tears streaming down her face. Lucian was beside her in an instant, his hands cupping her face. "Celestine, look at me." She did, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "You are safe," he said firmly. "I am here. You are safe." She collapsed against his chest, sobbing. Lucian held her tightly, his hand stroking her back in slow, soothing circles. "Tell me," he said softly. "Tell me what you dreamed." Through broken breaths, she told him. When she finished, Lucian was silent for a long moment. Then he pulled back and looked into her eyes. "Listen to me," he said, his voice low and intense. "I will never leave you. I will never regret marrying you. You are not a mistake. You are the best decision I have ever made." "But what if—" "No." His tone was firm. "No what-ifs, no doubts. You are my wife, my duchess, my partner, and nothing, nothing will change that." Celestine's tears slowed. She searched his face, looking for any sign of hesitation, but there was none. Only fierce, unwavering certainty. "I am afraid," she whispered. "I know," he said gently. "But fear does not mean you are weak. It means you care, and that is a strength, not a weakness." She leaned her forehead against his. "How did you get so wise?" He smiled faintly. "I had a good teacher." "Who?" "You." She laughed softly, despite herself. "I have not taught you anything." "You have taught me everything," he said quietly. "You taught me what it means to be brave, to be kind, to choose love over fear." He paused. "You taught me how to be human." Celestine's throat tightened. "Lucian." He kissed her, soft and slow and full of promise. When he pulled back, he smiled. "Now go back to sleep. I will stay awake and keep the nightmares away." "You cannot do that." "Watch me." And he did. He stayed awake all night, holding her, his arms a shield against the darkness. A week later, a letter arrived. It was addressed to Celestine. The handwriting was unfamiliar. The seal was plain, with no crest or insignia. Celestine opened it in the drawing room, Lucian sitting beside her. As she read, her face went pale. "What is it?" Lucian asked, concern flashing in his eyes. Celestine's hands trembled. She handed him the letter without a word. Lucian read it, his expression darkening with each line. The letter was from a woman named Eliza. She claimed to be Celestine's mother. Celestine had never known her mother. She had been abandoned as a baby, left at the door of an orphanage with nothing but a scrap of cloth tied around her wrist. She had spent her childhood in that orphanage, then been sent into service when she was 12. She had always believed her mother was dead, or that she had simply not wanted her. But now, this letter. "Dear Celestine, I know this will come as a shock. I am your mother. I gave you up because I had no choice. I was young, poor, and alone. I thought I was giving you a better life, but I have regretted it every day since. I have been searching for you for years, and now I have found you. Please, I beg you, let me see you. Let me explain. I live in the village of Ashford, 3 miles east of Ravensmoor. I will wait for you. With all my love, Eliza." Celestine stared at the letter, her mind reeling. "I do not understand," she whispered. Lucian set the letter down and took her hands. "What do you want to do?" I do not know." She looked up at him, her eyes wide. "What if she is lying? What if this is some kind of trick?" "Then we will find out," Lucian said firmly. Together. You will come with me? Of course. Celestine took a shaky breath. What if she is telling the truth? What if she really is my mother? Then you will have the chance to know her, Lucien said gently, and to decide what kind of relationship you want with her. Celestine nodded slowly. All right, let us go. They travelled to Ashford the next day. The village was small, nestled in a valley between two hills. The houses were simple, made of stone and wood, with thatched roofs and small gardens. Smoke curled from chimneys, and children played in the snowy streets. Lucien asked a villager where they could find Eliza. The man pointed them toward a small cottage at the edge of the village. Celestine's heart pounded as they approached. Her hands were clenched so tightly that her nails dug into her palms. Lucien squeezed her hand gently. I am here, he murmured. She nodded, grateful beyond words. They knocked on the door. For a moment, there was silence. Then footsteps. The door opened. A woman stood in the doorway. She was thin, with greying hair and lines etched deep into her face. But her eyes were the same shade of blue as Celestine's. Those eyes filled with tears the moment she saw Celestine. Oh, the woman breathed. Oh, my dear girl. Celestine could not speak. She could only stare. I am Eliza, the woman said, her voice trembling. I am your mother. Celestine's throat tightened. Why? She managed to choke out. Why did you leave me? Eliza's face crumpled. Please, come inside, let me explain. Celestine hesitated, then nodded. They stepped into the small cottage. It was warm, with a fire crackling in the hearth. The furniture was old but well kept. Everything was clean, simple, humble. Eliza gestured for them to sit. Lucien stayed close to Celestine, his hand never leaving hers. Eliza sat across from them, her hands folded in her lap. She took a deep breath. I was 17 when I had you, she began. I was a maid in a nobleman's house. Your father was the son of that nobleman. He promised to marry me, but when I told him I was pregnant, he denied it. He said I was lying. He had me thrown out. Celestine's chest tightened. I had no money, no family, nowhere to go, Eliza continued, her voice breaking. I tried to keep you. I truly did. But I was starving. I could not feed you. I could not keep you warm. I was terrified you would die. Tears streamed down her face. So I left you at the orphanage. I thought they could give you a better life than I could. But you never came back, Celestine whispered. I tried, Eliza said desperately. I went back when you were 5, but they told me you had been sent into service. They would not tell me where. I searched for years. And then I heard about the Duke's marriage. I heard your name. And I knew it was you. Celestine stared at her, emotions warring inside her. Anger, sadness, confusion, relief. Why should I believe you? She asked, her voice trembling. Eliza reached into her pocket and pulled out a small piece of cloth. It was faded and worn, but Celestine recognized it instantly. It was the same cloth that had been tied around her wrist when she was found. I kept the other half, Eliza said softly, holding it out. Celestine took it with shaking hands. She pressed the two pieces together. They fit perfectly. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I am so sorry, Eliza whispered. I am so sorry. Celestine looked at this woman, this stranger who was also her mother, and felt something shift inside her. She was not ready to forgive, not yet, but she could try to understand. I need time, Celestine said quietly. Eliza nodded, wiping her eyes. Of course, take all the time you need. Celestine stood. Lucien rose with her, his hand still holding hers. As they walked toward the door, Eliza called out, Thank you. For coming. For listening. Celestine paused. She did not turn around, but she nodded, and then she left. The ride back to Ravensmoor was silent. Celestine stared out the window of the carriage, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. Lucian did not push her to talk. He simply sat beside her, his presence steady and comforting. When they arrived home, Celestine went straight to her chambers. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the piece of cloth in her hands. Lucian followed her in. He knelt in front of her, his hands resting gently on her knees. "Talk to me," he said softly. "I do not know what to feel," she admitted, her voice small. "I am angry, but I am also sad, and confused, and relieved." "Relieved?" "Because now I know," she said, looking up at him. "Now I know why. I spent my whole life thinking I was unwanted, unworthy. But she did want me. She could not keep me." Lucian's eyes softened. "That must be hard to process." "It is," she paused. "Do you think I should forgive her?" "I think," Lucian said carefully, "that forgiveness is not something you owe anyone. It is something you give when you are ready. If you are ever ready." Celestine nodded slowly. "I do not know if I can." "Then do not," he said simply. "Not yet. Maybe not ever. But you can decide that on your own terms, no one else's." She looked at him, tears welling in her eyes. "How do you always know the right thing to say?" He smiled faintly. "I do not. I just know you." She leaned forward and kissed him, pouring all her gratitude and love into that single gesture. When they pulled apart, she whispered, "Thank you." "Always," he murmured. A month later, Celestine received an invitation to the annual Winter Gala, the most prestigious social event of the season. It was hosted by the Duke of Harrington, one of the most powerful men in the country. Every noble family would be there, including Lord Edward. Celestine's stomach twisted with anxiety when she saw the invitation. "Do we have to go?" she asked Lucian. "No," he said, "but it would be good for people to see us together, to see that we are strong." "I do not feel strong," she admitted. "You are," he said firmly. "You just do not see it yet." She took a deep breath. "All right, let us go." The night of the gala, Celestine wore a gown of deep sapphire blue. It was made of silk and velvet, with delicate embroidery along the bodice. Her hair was styled in an elegant updo, with small pearls woven through the curls. She looked like a duchess, but inside, she still felt like a servant. Lucian offered her his arm. "You are breathtaking," he said softly. She blushed. "Thank you." They arrived at the gala to a sea of stares. Whispers followed them as they entered the grand ballroom. Celestine kept her chin high, her hand resting on Lucian's arm. Lord Edward was there, standing near the refreshment table. When he saw them, his face twisted with bitterness, but he did not approach. Throughout the evening, Celestine danced with Lucian. She spoke politely with other guests. She smiled and nodded and played the part of the perfect duchess. But inside, she was exhausted. Near the end of the night, a young noblewoman approached her. She was beautiful, with dark hair and kind eyes. "Your Grace," the woman said, curtsying, "I just wanted to say, I think what you have done is extraordinary." Celestine blinked, surprised. "What do you mean?" "You married for love," the woman said softly, "not for power or status. You followed your heart, and that takes courage." She smiled. "I admire you." Celestine's throat tightened. "Thank you," she whispered. The woman curtsied again and walked away. Celestine turned to Lucian, tears in her eyes. "See," he said gently. "You are changing minds, one person at a time." She smiled. "Maybe." But the greatest challenge was yet to come. Edward, desperate and enraged, made one final move. He spread a rumor that Lucian had been declared unfit to hold his title, that the king himself was considering stripping Lucian of his dukedom because of his marriage to a commoner. The rumor was false, but it spread quickly, causing panic among Lucian's allies. Lucian called for a meeting with the king's advisor. He traveled to London, Celestine at his side. The advisor, Lord Pembroke, was a stern man with silver hair and sharp eyes. He listened as Lucian explained the situation. "Your Grace," Lord Pembroke said carefully, "the king has no intention of stripping you of your title, but he is concerned." "About what?" Lucian asked, his voice tight. "About the scandal," Lord Pembroke said bluntly. "The nobility is divided. Some support you, others do not. The king does not wish for this to escalate into a larger conflict." "What does he want?" Lucian asked. Lord Pembroke looked at Celestine. "He wants to meet her, to see for himself whether she is fit to be a duchess." Celestine's heart sank. Lucian's jaw tightened. "She is fit. She is more than fit." "Then prove it," Lord Pembroke said simply. The meeting with the king was held in the royal palace. Celestine had never been so terrified in her life. She wore her finest gown, her hair styled perfectly, her hands trembling as Lucian led her through the palace halls. They were escorted into a private sitting room. The king sat in a high-backed chair, his expression unreadable. He was older than Celestine had expected, with grey hair and a lined face, but his eyes were sharp and intelligent. "Your Majesty," Lucian said, bowing. Celestine curtsied deeply. The king studied her for a long moment. Then he gestured for them to sit. "So," the king said, his voice deep and measured, "you are the woman who has caused such a stir." Celestine swallowed hard. "Yes, Your Majesty." "Tell me," the king said, leaning forward, "why did you marry the Duke?" Celestine's heart pounded. She glanced at Lucian, who nodded encouragingly. She took a deep breath. "Because I love him, Your Majesty." The king raised an eyebrow. "Love. How quaint." "It is the truth," Celestine said, her voice gaining strength. "I did not marry him for his title or his wealth. I married him because he is kind, honorable, and good. Because he saw me as a person, not a servant. Because he gave me a chance when no one else would." The king studied her. "And do you believe you are fit to be a duchess?" Celestine hesitated. Then she said, "I do not know, Your Majesty. I am still learning. But I am trying. Every day I am trying to be worthy of the title. Worthy of him." The king was silent for a long moment. Then, to Celestine's shock, he smiled. "You are honest," he said. "That is rare in this world." He turned to Lucian. "You chose well, Duke Ashford." Lucian let out a breath of relief. "Thank you, Your Majesty." The king stood. "You have my blessing, both of you." Celestine's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, Your Majesty." As they left the palace, Celestine turned to Lucian, her face glowing with joy. "We did it," she whispered. "No," Lucian said, pulling her into his arms. "You did it." A year later, Ravensmoor Manor was filled with laughter and light. Celestine stood in the nursery, cradling a tiny baby in her arms. A daughter, with dark hair and grey eyes like her father. Lucian stood beside her, his arm around her waist, his face soft with wonder. "She is perfect," he whispered. "She is," Celestine agreed, tears of joy streaming down her face. Lady Margaret sat nearby, knitting a tiny blanket, her face beaming with pride. Even Mrs. Whitlock had softened, bringing gifts and cooing over the baby. Celestine looked around the nursery, at the people who had become her family, at the life she had built, and felt a wave of overwhelming gratitude. She had started with nothing. She had been mocked, scorned, and rejected. But she had found love. She had found strength. She had found herself. And now, she had everything. Lucian kissed her temple. "I love you," he murmured. "I love you too," she whispered back. And as the sun set over Ravensmoor Manor, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Celestine knew that she was exactly where she was meant to be.